Today's guest is Kurt Schnakenberg. He's the CEO at Chicago Brass. Kurt, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, you have a cool background. Not many people I see the sort of resume that says captain.
Yeah.
What is this?
It's a winding road to get where most of us end up, right? So
Yeah,
I've had my
captain, luxury building materials enthusiast. Walk me through captain.
yeah, so I'm an Eagle Scout. I was in Boy Scouts, a huge part of my life growing up, and in Chicago there's this organization called Sea Scouts. And it is where they get a group of, I believe it's 14 to like 20-year-olds together, and we get to go sailing. So I spent a bunch of my time sailing, and that was a bit of a feeder into the boats down at Navy Pier in Chicago, where a bunch of us would go through that program, and then we would go get a job working boats down at Navy Pier. So I got my 200-ton inland masters captain's license when I was 19. So I was driving a roughly 200-foot boat at 19 with 400 people on it. So it was it was an experience.
Wow. You said you sailed. What were you sailing early days?
Yeah, so we had a Cal 40 is what we sailed on, and then I spent time on smaller boats too. I own a Cal 25 myself for a little while. We sailed 110s, J20s, mainly in
Okay.
that range. Yeah.
J20s. It sounds familiar. I mean, I sailed a little bit, just
Okay.
really small stuff. I learned on I think it was called an Optimus or a Sabot, and then lasers
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Hobie cats
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So those are kind of fun, just kind of rip around in the, near the water. So in the water, yeah. So
Yeah, it's a good time. My kid was at a sailing camp last week doing the Optis, like little bathtub looking boats, right? They're
that's right.
yeah,
Bathtub with
yeah,
the little sail.
yeah. It was fun. It's fun.
Pretty cool.
Good activity.
So Chicago Brass, was that a family business?
Yeah, so we started in the 80s. My father founded Chicago Brass, but before then, his grandfather, we owned Ace Hardware number 8. So Ace is a co-op out of Chicago, formed in I want to say it was the mid 20s, mid to late 20s. And my great let's see if I get this right. My great grandfather had an independent hardware store, and as Aces were starting to roll up and become a co-op, uh, phase one were the three originals, and then we were part of phase two. And
Mm.
so my family has lineage in the hardware industry for quite some time.
And what's a story that was passed on to you from Ace Hardware location number 8?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we maintained that location until I was about maybe 16 or 17. And I remember as a kid, we had our warehouse was actually upstairs, right? It was in an urban center in Chicago. And so, warehouse space was not easy. So it was upstairs, it was in the attic. And we had these manual belts that would bring product up. So from a pretty young age, my brother and I would spend time messing around in the warehouse and moving product up and down this conveyor belt and moving things. It was a great experience. I learned pretty much. I worked in every department: plumbing, paints, lighting. I worked in every department in the hardware store as a kid, which was a lot of fun. Growing up, learning a lot customer service, but then learning the trades, understanding how to navigate, and talk to people in that world, and what was expected and not expected. It was a master class on how to communicate.
There you go. What convinced you to join the family business?
Oh, that's a good question. I came in 2006 or 2007. So, right at the precipice when things were ripping. And then my first few years was like a run straight downhill, right? So, without sharing numbers, I share, early in my career, I torpedoed a bunch of my family's stability by getting into the building industry in that '08, '09 period. Um, so I was working on boats, and I just gotten a little tired of it. It was a lovely experience. I enjoyed it, but it was starting to get repetitive. And I have always had this entrepreneurial spirit, and it just having that job where I was working for somebody else just wasn't cutting it for me. And so I looked at going on my own, looked at coming in the family business. My father invited me into the business, and then so I ran full speed into it.
Yeah, and you were just, sort of the, nice enough to share some of the downs, but what's some of the positives, things that did sort of sink in and take root? These things that you did, once you joined.
Sure. Yeah, a lot for me is about the people. It always has been, both the staff and our customers, and just some of the staff that I've worked with now for a long period of time, seeing things change in each other's lives and the connection we have is uh is really powerful for me. That's one of my biggest, um claim to fame is the wrong word, but the things I hang my hat on, right, about what we've done. I talk about 08, 09 as a hard time, but it was also a lot of fun because we got to try and figure it out, right? Like everybody, it was all hands on deck. Everyone's trying to figure out what to do. So currently, Chicago Brass's door and cabinet hardware, we used to do plumbing and have a bigger sort of product base. And during that time, we were able to negotiate essentially jettisoning the plumbing portion of our business that carried a higher overhead but lower profitability. And we essentially traded it to another company in exchange for their hardware side of their business because they did a little bit of hardware and a lot of plumbing. We did a lot of hardware and a little plumbing. And so we did some of these imaginative things to not only keep the boat afloat, but also elevate and grow. And everything's cyclical, right? And so even in the depths of the housing crisis, we're like, well, it's going to turn around. I mean, eventually things are going to change. It's going to get better. So how do we position? So it was kind of fun at the same time being unburdened and saying, well, we've got to figure something else out here because inertia, just staying with what was happening and being stuck wasn't going to work, right? Like
Yeah.
we had to get better. And so I didn't. I look back. I didn't sleep all that well. It wasn't the best time in my life, but looking back, I have a lot. I take a lot of pride in what we did in those years.
Yeah. I mean, it's really powerful. I think what you were saying was, hey, look, when you don't have to deal with, the sort of the inertia of change, people don't like change until you realize that things are not working and everyone's on the same page in
Yeah.
terms of we need to do something different. And there's something to be said about having nothing to lose or that feeling of, hey, we got to try something.
It is kind of fun, right? Like, I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a masochist, but it is a little bit of fun.
I think if you like entrepreneurship, you're a little bit, have those, you like to punish yourself, right?
That's no doubt, no doubt.
Oh, that's awesome. So, right, on your profile, I think I mentioned it earlier. You said luxury building materials enthusiast. I
Yeah.
mean, for us, we sell coatings, which is not necessarily a luxury. It's kind of, it's kind of foundational and stuff like that. But what is what do you think some of the fundamental aspects you need to know about, marketing, selling, or running a luxury building materials business?
Hmm. A mentor of mine in the industry explained to me once. He said most manufacturer, anyone in the supply chain, right, manufacturer, distributor, whatever approach you take, can get to, let's say, 90% quality, right? So most organizations, people out there are capable of it. Getting to 95 is really hard. Now, it's within most people's capabilities, but they don't always want to sacrifice and do the things necessary to get to 95. Getting to 98, which is to me what defines luxury, right? Is getting that 98 percentile. Not everyone can do it. Very few people want to do it. So how do you get into that world and find peace there? Because it is a demanding space, right? When you have luxury trades and luxury consumers and everyone all along understands the elevated world they live in, they're going to demand an elevated level of service, an elevated level of product
Yeah.
from everybody involved. And so much has been commoditized. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to make it one. Right. And so much, it becomes this race to the bottom in so many places where this isn't about margin for my company. It's about working in an environment where more than simply cost matters. And I
Yeah.
think luxury, where cost always matters, it always has an impact on everything. But luxury is a space I found where people look at the totality of the experience and say, does this feel good?
Yeah.
Did it feel worth it? Did I enjoy it?
Yeah. So, can you give me some examples of things you've seen in other companies or the journey that you went through from getting from, let's say, 90% you mentioned
Yeah.
to 95 or 98%?
Yeah. A lot of it comes to people and building processes tied in with the people, right? And when you recognize you have a team member or someone working that is comfortable at 90, and that doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they're a failure. I mean, they can be really good, but are they good for 98? And even if and not just are they good, but do they want to be there, right? Like if we push them to get to 98, or not push, if we empower them to get to 98, will they enjoy living there, right? Will they like being in that environment? Because it's a different space, right? It's like I don't know if you played sports in high school, right? But like a locker room is a different space than the rest of society, right? Where I think operating in an organization that's in that 98 range, it just feels different, and it doesn't always feel better, right? It
Yeah.
has to feel right. Right person, right seat. Do you feel right in that
Yeah.
space?
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So, now did you yourself find peace at 98? Were you built that way or did you learn to adapt into feeling that sort of level of peace at 98?
Ooh, that's a compelling question. I think I've always felt the draw towards it. I did not feel comfortable there for the first probably 10 years of my adult professional life because I think I was shooting for 100 and I didn't have the wisdom to understand that just ain't a reality, right? No one's getting there. So I was unsatisfied because I couldn't get there. And when I found 98, that number means a lot to me. It's not just one mistake, right? One mistake drops you to 99. You got a little bit of room to be yourself because we're all imperfect people, and so you still get to be yourself. And so I've now found it very rewarding to live in that space. But it,
Got
it
it.
took probably 10 solid years of
Wow. No,
trying.
that's interesting because at 100 you might not have a lot of people that want to be there, right?
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um what was the catalyst of starting a marketing agency?
So, well, sort of like the staffing side, right?
Oh, staffing,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah. No, it's
agency,
all good. It's
yes.
all good. Yeah. Yeah. So, Chicago Brass is. I work in luxury decorative hardware. What we are essentially spec writers, right? Architects, designers, general contractors bring us in to write spec and then ultimately sell the product. And we live at the very, very high end. Even within the subset of luxury, we're in the top one or two notches. And so it is uh, a fairly stable environment, right? Where most of the players there, manufacturers, distributors, most of our clients, we kind of all are here, right? Like there aren't a lot of entrants and exits within that space. It's not big enough to attract the monster companies to try and come in and take us all over. And so it gets a tad stagnant, right? Not that I don't enjoy it, but if I'm like scratching that itch for growth, there's only so much outside of geographic expansion that I can do in that world. And so we're always looking at our existing business and say, how do I empower my people? Right? How do I empower them to be happier, to like being at the 98% more, right? To be better compensated for being there? How do I make this whole environment for my team feel better? And so in doing that, I started talking to other people in other industries and trying to get ideas. And we started building an offshore team to support my team in Chicago Brass. So we didn't fire anyone, right? Like this antiquated idea of, oh, you're taking Americans' jobs and all these things. That is not what we did, right? When I came in and said, how do I build a support team for my key role player, like key decision makers and the game makers, like the people that can take a shot and win, right? Like how do I make them better and elevate them and support them? So we built out a team to support everybody with an offshore team, and we tried different countries in labor, and we pretty solely settled on the Philippines. That's where almost all of our staff offshore is now. And so after I was successful with that with Chicago Brass, and it, it look it just be frank, it made us a more profitable company. It made more money for our employees. Like it just made us a better organization. And we've gotten more consistent in the deliverance of our performance. So staying at 98, right? On our bad days, we drop to 95, right? And so how do we avoid that? And so having an offshore team has forced us to be more process focused, more paying attention to those repeatable details over and over again. And so we built out this team and processes to support them. And then I started talking about it, and I had other people say, "Hey, we, we don't know where to start. We'd love the idea, but that seems either scary or just something we haven't tried before." And so then I started this agency where we help create the workflows, and also we're a staffing agency based out of the Philippines now. So that I'm the only US based employee of that company. Everyone is in the Philippines besides me. And we're building out teams for people in the architectural design, build material spaces.
Very cool. Awesome. What else are you interested right now in terms of business and entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship's a bigger question. I'll start on the business, like the building materials business side of things.
Yeah.
Is I think the category of AI is sort of, I think, overplayed. It's going to have a massive impact. There's no question about it. But I think it's like Bitcoin early on or whatever, even .com. If you go back further, people just attach AI and suddenly it's everything, right? And they're revolutionizing. I think we have a long way to go before it's able to really fulfill what we need. I think what is having a bigger impact in the building material worlds right now is all this inflow of low code or no code software development where smaller organizations can have custom software in 6 months instead of multiple seven figures to Oracle or SAP to build something in 5 years. And I think that is the first step towards fully digitizing our space and allowing AI to then get its grip on it. Um, I'm enjoying talking sort of up and down the verticals that we operate in, trying to figure out how to get my data, working with the data of my manufacturers, and then working with my clients' data so that we can integrate better. It's not just like an integrated ordering system, but actual data that can help us all make decisions and push us in better directions. So I'm having a lot of fun with that right now. Um, on the entrepreneurship side, just in general, outside of the building material world, I think there's so much opportunity right now tied to sort of figuring out the new landscape, right? Like I think the landscape of employment changed, employer, employee, this remote, all that stuff, everything that happened over the last 5 years has seemingly sort of settled. And now it's how do we optimize these new environments? And I'm someone who always looks at even with competition or any of these, some of them would I guess traditionally be viewed as competition, is it doesn't have to be a zero sum game. And don't get me wrong, I'm a capitalist, right? But how can we work together to try and make this more efficient for everybody? I remember really early in my career, was it 2007, 2008, in the luxury residential world, every project that an architect put out was being bid by like 7 or 8 GCs, which meant you had how many dozens of subs sitting underneath each one. And I remember sitting one night looking at a set of plans and I'm like, this project is a net loss to our industry. When you add in all the people that spend all their time bidding this and going through it, even the person that makes it, the money that they're making on it does not cover all the expense that went in of all the other parties bidding it, right? And just looking and saying this just doesn't add up. And I think our industry is starting to figure out a little bit uh, that some of our approaches are antiquated. And so, how do we, while still maintaining competition amongst where it's needed, right? And it keeps us all honest and keeps prices from going exorbitantly high and all these positive things that come from it. How do we maintain competition while supporting the industry sort of as a whole and a little bit of greater good there?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Yeah, I like the greater good. Let's see, you touched on lots of different things. In terms of software, you mentioned, some of this no code, low code stuff is applicable to smaller companies. I mean, how is your organization wired? It sounds like you've implemented a few things in-house. What does that look like for you?
Sure. So we historically ran on a Microsoft Dynamics ERP, right? So massive ERP that I think a lot of people um, probably are familiar with or have used, and we were getting frustrated with the. It wasn't as much the cost; it was more the time to implement any changes, and and because there were these ERPs are so complex, it's you pull on one string and then everything unravels. So about a year and a half ago, we started building our own ERP on Airtable, which is a historically was just a relational database. Sort of, it looked like Excel, but on steroids, and didn't have the pivot table functionality, but it was an easy to manage database. You didn't have to understand SQL or any of that to build out a database. And in the not so recent or so far past, they introduced a front end. So they created interfaces at the onset at the front end so that your enterprise could use it as a complete software program. And so we started chipping away at business functionalities and moving modules over to something we built ourselves. Now we pay licensing fees to Airtable to use their platform, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the Microsoft fees are. And rather than having to go to a Microsoft consultant, we have Airtable developers in house, which they do it themselves, but they don't even really have to know how to code. So, and some of the changes and stuff, my team that are not developers at all, that are hardware people, have been able to adjust it, right? So, like in our purchasing module, my purchasing team looks and says, "I don't like how we're generating purchase orders." They change the workflow themselves, right? We are able to on the fly optimize, and so it's been it's been really big for us. You know, our CRM and project pipeline we moved over first, and then we just started adding modules on, and it gives us transparency of data, ability to see information. I'm now set up where historically, my vendors had no transparency in our data. So we're a distributor, spec writers. My manufacturers, they'd ask us, how much work you got going on? What's next year going to look like, right? And we'd position strategic, we'd put lipstick on a pig if it didn't look so great, but we wanted them to still love us, right? Or we'd position it in one way. Now my vendors have portals where they can go in, they can see my pipe. They don't see who we're selling it to, but they can see how much we have bid out there. They can see when we think we're going to convert it, what the probability of it converting is, right? So it's this transparency of data for them to see. Some of them don't love it, right? Because they see, hey, why are we down with you guys? Or, it isn't always good, but it's
Mm,
true. What it is it's true, right? They're
yeah,
able to actually see things.
yeah,
Um,
that
yeah,
makes sense. I mean, obviously, if they can project out their inventory levels and production levels, I mean, it's a huge value to that. The biggest problem with manufacturing type supplier relationships is that delay in information transfer.
yeah. Which I
Right?
always laugh because if I have an up year, right, they're celebrating me. And I'm like, great, but the reality is that's work we did 6 months ago or 9 months ago. Like, you don't know what's coming 6 to 9 months from now, right? And that's the scary part of this industry.
Yeah, that's so true. Very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've answered most of the questions.
Okay.
With social or any of the other stuff you do on
Mhm.
demand gen, anything you like interesting there?
To be honest, lately that has not been where my head's at. I've been focused on the technology and the staffing side, so I
Mm,
haven't spent as much time as I used to there. I lived there for a while. It has not been our focus. Now we did offshore it, right? So our web developer, our social media and content manager is all based in the Philippines and is part of our team and it
yeah.
has metric to hit and they're hitting it. I In the luxury world, it's so relationship driven, right? Like for us, it is all about that relationship that we have with someone. So I know it's going to sound real boring, but we still do a bunch of lunch and learns. We still do the educate like that. We'd still bring clients on factory tours. Like those are the things that still to this day work. They're not exciting or flashy, but they work.